We're now at the halfway point of the Game of Wool, and episode 4 gave me something I genuinely wasn't expecting. An episode that talks about stitches and techniques and why certain choices make sense in yarncraft. It feels like this episode finally remembers that knitting and crochet are skills with logic behind them and not just tools for television chaos. If you've watched my previous reviews, you know I've been pretty candid about the craft conflation, the judging inconsistencies, the timing challenges, and don't get me wrong, episode 4 is still in a crochet-heavy identity crisis, but this episode gave us just a glimpse into what the show could look like if it treated knitting and crochet with respect and not as a marketing gimmick. More importantly, something subtle is starting to happen in the barn. Whether the show realizes it or not, the contestants are learning from each other, and we're starting to see techniques and textures and stitches migrate from one contestant to another. And this might be the most honest and meaningful representation of the knitting and crochet community that we've seen in the show so far. So let's talk about Kids Week, why episode 4 might mark a turning point for the show, and where the competition is heading from here. Before we dive into the first challenge, we have to address the obvious tension behind the brief for this episode. The contestants, referred to as knitters throughout the entire season, are being asked to create a kid's costume using crochet only. We are now halfway through a competition branded as the search for Britain's best knitter, and at this point, 5 out of the 8 challenges have incorporated crochet and 3 out of the 8 have required it. At this point, it's not unreasonable to question whether this is a knitting competition that incorporates crochet or a crochet competition with a knitting tagline for branding purposes. The show doesn't seem sure, and that uncertainty changes how both the contestants and the audience experience the competition. That said, this episode finally positioned stitch choice and technical decision-making as part of the judging criteria, and if the show insists on drifting toward crochet, the least they can do is acknowledge the technical elements behind it, and in this episode they kind of finally did. For me, one of the most surprising and delightful elements of this episode was that the stitches finally mattered. We heard loop stitch, spike stitch, cluster stitch, treble stitch. The judges evaluated stitch suitability and engineering choices in a way that respected both the contestants and the audience, and that shift didn't fix everything, but it definitely made the episode more watchable. Challenge number 1 asked contestants to create a toddler costume using crochet alone in just 12 hours. Each costume has to have a recognizable yet unique character, and they have to have 3 elements, like a hat, a bodysuit, and maybe a prop. Holger created a Faux costume based off his childhood stuffed animal, Faux, and for anyone following the competition, there should be no surprise that this came out impeccable. The craftsmanship, the quality, we'd expect nothing less from Holger. But my favorite detail about this costume is actually the brushing out technique he used around the fox hood that goes with the costume, because it reminded me a lot of the technique Ailsa used in episode 2 for her dog costume to create the graffiti effect in the lettering. I couldn't help but think this might be our first example of the contestants being influenced and inspired by each other. Maybe Holger really appreciated Ailsa's use of that technique and decided to incorporate it himself. We see the same thing with Lydia's lion costume. Lydia uses the crochet loop stitch to create her lion's mane and a few other details, the same stitch Isaac used to create his gritty-inspired dog costume in episode 2. The judges really liked it, and I wonder if Lydia saw that, thought it was a great application of the stitch, and decided to use it here. And if I'm right, that storyline is the most accurate representation that we have had of the knitting community in this entire show. Crafters sitting alongside each other, looking over at each other's projects, learning new skills and techniques, getting inspired by what the people around you are making. Now, the show never acknowledges it, but the evidence is in the work, and if we're looking for things to appreciate about the show, I think this is it. The connections that are being made in the yarn barn are real, and if you follow the contestants on social media, you'll see that Meadow and Lydia still get together every week to watch the episodes air together, and Simon, Tracy, Gordon, Isaac, they've all gotten together with Holger and the judges, and they've been going to yarn events together in their areas. The community element of knitting is blossoming despite the infertile soil of the competitive environment, and I love that that community element of knitting can't be stopped despite all the problems of the show. Isaac created an explorer costume using the spike stitch to mimic the canvas in explorer outfits, and the judges pointed to his use of crochet intarsia as growth. In episode 1, he was doing knitted intarsia, and in this episode, he's doing crochet intarsia, and that's not quite progress, it's switching mediums. Knitting and crochet are 2 different crafts, different tools, different mechanics, and different fabric created, treating Isaac's performance in crochet intarsia as growth from his experience with knitted intarsia is like using someone's growth on the violin as evidence that they've also learned the guitar. It's not growth within a skill set, it's a jump to an adjacent medium. And yes, some cultures do use the same term for knitting and crochet, and many fiber artists are fluent in both skills, but that doesn't make them interchangeable. Knitting uses one row of live stitches. Crochet tends to resolve one stitch at a time. The fabrics behave differently. The techniques are distinct. So when the show frames progress in crochet and tarja as evidence of growth in knitting, it flattens both skills into one and simplifies them both. Now, although knitting and crochet are distinct skills, they can visually mimic each other, and Ailsa demonstrates amazing mastery of both skills with her zebra costume. She was inspired by a vintage sweater pattern that uses short rows to insert stripes of varying widths. And Ailsa carefully measured the height of different crochet stitches to create this faux short row stripe color insert effect. Not only is this an amazing demonstration of skill, I can't help but feel there's like a little bit of rebellion hidden in Ailsa's work, because initially when she got the brief, like make a children's costume, she thought, oh my gosh, this vintage pattern would make a perfect kid's costume, but then they said, you can't knit, you have to crochet. So she said, fine, I'll do it in crochet then. I'm super impressed, and I'm actually sad that the show didn't really take time to highlight what an amazing accomplishment that was. If the goal of this show is to celebrate skill and to search for Britain's best, Ailsa's work deserved more attention. And then there's Simon. Now, let's remember that Simon learned to crochet for this show. He had weeks before filming to get up to speed, and he created a fully realized and recognizable night costume with a helmet, with a visor that comes down, and a little mace, like a toy for the children to play with. This is immediately recognizable. It's super unique. I'm sure any small child would love it. My 2-year-old would love this costume. Simon completed the brief. He did it well, and the judges criticized him for not using a large enough variety of different crochet stitches. And this gets at a deeper issue, because Game of Wool keeps treating more as better. More embellishments, more glam, more stitches, more requirements in the challenge. Like, the more complexity that can be layered on, the better it is. However, that's not really how crafting works in real life. In actual yarn craft, more stitch variety doesn't actually mean higher quality. Simon made something recognizable, functional, and cohesive, but the show keeps wanting more bells and whistles, as if the more embellishments and textures something has, the better it is. This pattern that spans the season, that the contestants add tassels, fringe, glam, and wow, I'm not sure where it's coming from. Is it to make things look better on camera, or is it to make them look more silly? Is it to add more complexity, to make the time frames feel more tight? Is it just based on judging preference? Regardless of what it is, it's not how real makers design, and it's not how real makers craft. This is a kid's costume. It's not a stitch sampler. Simon is being penalized for creating an excellent product in a medium he just learned for this show because he didn't embellish it enough. It feels incredibly unfair, and I am concerned that this is foreshadowing that he will soon be eliminated. Tracy crocheted a bee costume, and she had this really creative solution for the wings, where she bent hair curlers into the shape she was looking for and she crocheted over them. Now, the judges found ways to nitpick this. They said they were too heavy, they didn't like how they were hanging, but Tracy did use a variety of stitches, so the judges liked that. That kept her safe. And then there's Dipti. Dipti identifies as a novice knitter. She's described herself as not that good. And from episode 1 till today, we've seen Dipti experience a wide range of emotions, most of them not positive. Now, some of you have commented that you like to have beginners in the mix, that it helps you to see them make little mistakes because you can learn from them and improve your own craft. But when there's a skill gap as large as the one on this show, when you have self-professed beginners like Dipti up against true professionals like Holger and Ailsa, it starts to border on unfair, on cruel. Instead of inspiration, you get discouragement. And by episode 4, we can see that clearly in Dipti. She finishes up her crochet crayon costume and she looks around and says,
after looking at everybody else's makes, mine is really quite simple. Maybe I've reached my peak, I don't know. Maybe I'm out of my depth, I don't know.
And honestly, how could she not feel that way? When you pit a beginner against an expert, it's no longer about creativity, it's about survival. During the challenge, the judges come up behind Dipti, they loom over her from behind the couch, and they kind of point out her crochet and tarja letters and say, those don't look so good, tidy those up a bit. And Dipti really wants to incorporate their feedback to show growth in this new skill she's trying for the episode. So she does some running stitch around the letters, and honestly, it kind of looked worse, but she was trying to listen to what the judges told her to do. Unfortunately, those letters and the feedback that the judges gave her themselves became a factor in her elimination. And here's what's frustrating about this, and a major concern about the show, is that one of the best things about craft is it gives adults the opportunity to take on a beginner mindset again, to put yourself in a place where you're not very good and see yourself grow. And Dipti did exactly that. She listened to feedback, she was trying a new technique, she took their advice and she tried to listen to it, and that's what got her sent home. Dipti is a beginner. She's not yet at the level of her competitors. And that's not her fault. It's a casting error. So penalizing her for that feels deeply unfair. Putting a novice into a high-speed televised craft competition against seasoned experts doesn't celebrate learning, and it barely celebrates craft. It turns vulnerability into a humiliation ritual, and that's not what craft is about. The second challenge asks contestants to knit or crochet a wall hanging, and that wall hanging should be based on the childhood game where you fold a piece of paper and each child takes a piece of the paper to draw a part of a figure, and then it's unfolded to reveal a crazy, cacophonous, chaotic character that makes everyone giggle. This brief emphasized imagination, sensory elements, different textures and embellishments, and something super colorful and fun for a child. Team 1 was Dipti, Holger, Lydia, and Simon. They create a 4-part tapestry with a human face and sea creature arms. It has lots of moving elements like zippers and pants that can be removed, and sensory toes. Listen, they're following the brief, okay? They're doing the embellishments they were supposed to do. And in fact, Dipti ends up crocheting her panel because she's worried about time, but we see her mention swatching and starting over to make sure that it feels cohesive with the rest of the group. Team 2 is Tracy, Isaac, and Ailsa. They opt for a same background color so that things look a little bit more cohesive, and they use a more geometric design. So triangle head, circles for the body, focusing on shapes and colors. There are a few interactive elements like shoes that tie and arms that can be pulled. These wall hangings are meant to be irreverent, colorful, child-friendly, but when it comes time for judging, Team 1 is penalized for things looking a little bit too chaotic, and Team 2 is praised for having a very uniform look because of the same background color. This is an ongoing issue with the show. The judging doesn't align with the brief. It feels arbitrary and based on aesthetics, even when the contestants met the many different requirements given to them in the task. And it's not a small issue. It speaks to a competition where the judging shifts based on the story the producers want to tell. And when it comes to the finished object, objectively, these are kind of weird, right? And I say this as a parent of a 2-year-old. Like, I've spent a lot of time in spaces that are aimed for kids just this age, and I've never seen anything like this hanging in any of those spaces. The wall hangings are kind of scary and not really functional the way the challenge wants them to be. And even Holger goes on Instagram and describes the wall hanging as that thing, and then he goes on to say, what is the point of a sensory and interactive piece for a small child if most of the elements are above the eye level of an average adult? I can happily confirm that our adorable models for Kids Week did not come anywhere near our wall hangings, so no young minds were scarred or permanently harmed through exposure to our artwork. Besides these wall hangings looking like moderately creepy, knitting just isn't a medium that's meant to be hung. It's one of the first things that you're told, don't hang your sweaters, right? Fold them, put them in a drawer, because hanging knitting can cause it to quickly stretch and lose its shape. So knitting probably wouldn't be the best medium for this wall hanging anyway. This challenge is just another challenge in a long string of nonsensical, barely functional, incongruous challenges that don't serve to show off the contestants' skills. Here's the takeaway that becomes unavoidable by episode 4. These challenges were not designed to showcase knitting skill. They were created to produce easily marketable kits. And that's why we see the crochet-heavy challenges, the beginner-friendly projects, the chunky yarn, the children's costumes. The monetization is baked into the challenge design. It also reframes the show's identity crisis. Maybe the show isn't confused. Maybe they are very intentionally filling this show with wacky and nonsensical challenges that produce a visual punchline to keep people watching, and then challenges that are optimized to produce the most lucrative kits. Chunky, beginner-friendly kits sell. Children's clothes sell. Crochet kits definitely sell. I just saw Whooples in my local Target this week. Maybe this show is just optimizing for projects that will sell the fastest, photograph cleanly, and can be worked up quickly to be converted into kits that are incorporated into each episode. As we pass the midpoint of the show, I wonder if you were tasked with creating challenges for this show that both showcased knitting skill but could easily be converted into a fast-selling kit tie-in. What challenges would you have designed? Because it seems like that's the challenge that the production behind this show was facing. Next week's challenges are knitted food and the ultimate textured cardigan. So we will see a return to knitting, even if crochet might have been a better choice for amigurumi food. Now, if episode 4 is any indication, there may still be room for skills and creativity to shine through in this competition and for a focus on stitch choice and engineering to really take the front seat. And if the judging can align with the restrictions of the brief, maybe we'll finally get the show we were hoping to get. But even if we don't, we're still seeing a glimmer of maker-to-maker inspiration and real-life connection shine through in this show, and maybe that's enough to keep watching. For episode 5, I'll be going live to share my initial reactions upon viewing the show. So if you want to see my reaction, I can't share the show itself due to copyright restriction, but if you want to watch along in your home, you can find the link for that in the description. And if you want to have a little fun, whether you're watching with me or not, I also have a bingo card in the description that you all helped me come up with the squares for if you want to make watching the next episode a little bit more fun. Next week, I'll be back with another episode recap for episode 5, so stay tuned for that. And as always, it's been really, really nice to talk about knitting with you today, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Bye!